The seating chart told me everything before anyone found the courage to say it out loud. I just didn't understand what I was looking at yet. That morning, I had stood at my kitchen counter until nearly 10, turning the card over in my hands as though it could tell me whether I had chosen the right words. I had written it 3 times, not too much. Not too little. Nothing that asked for anything in return. Congratulations on your new beginning. May your home always be filled with love, patience, and laughter. With all my love, Mom. Inside the envelope was a check I had prepared 2 weeks earlier. It was more money than I could comfortably spare, but this was my only son's wedding. I had spent years imagining this day. I had worked through difficult seasons to keep us standing. First, when my husband, Thomas, became too sick to continue working at the manufacturing plant. Then, after we buried him, when I raised our son, Caleb, alone, somewhere along the way, I had made myself one promise. I would never make Caleb feel that he owed me for everything I had sacrificed. I didn't want repayment. I wanted to see him happy. That was all. I arrived at Magnolia Ridge, an elegant reception hall outside Raleigh, just as the string quartet gave way to livelier music. The ceremony was over. The real celebration had begun. I straightened my sage green dress and stepped through the doors. Warm candlelight filled the room. Crystal glasses glittered beneath chandeliers. White linens covered every table. An enormous floral arrangement stood between silver candle holders. For one brief moment, I smiled. My boy was married. I had finally seen it happen. Then I walked toward the entrance table. A gold-framed seating chart stood on an easel. I searched for my name once, twice, then a third time, slower, so it wasn't there. I thought perhaps I had overlooked it. A young hostess approached me with a clipboard. "Good evening, are you with the catering team?" She stopped when she noticed my expression. "Oh, you're Caleb's mother." Her voice suddenly became quieter. "There's a chair we can bring out for you near the service entrance." I stared at her. "A chair?" She gave an embarrassed smile. "I'm sorry, that's what I was told." Before I could answer, I saw him. Caleb stood across the room in his dark suit, laughing with his new in-laws. His jacket pulled slightly across one shoulder. I noticed that immediately. Mothers notice things like that. The woman beside him, his new wife, Brianna, whispered something into his ear. Then she looked directly at me. Caleb followed her gaze. His smile disappeared. He walked toward me. "Mom," his voice was low, urgent. "You weren't supposed to come." I stared at him. "What?" He glanced around the room, apparently more concerned about who was watching than about what he had just said. Then he repeated it. "You don't belong here." The words landed harder than I expected. Behind me, someone gave a short laugh. My fingers tightened around my purse. Inside was the envelope, the check, the card, everything I had brought because I believed I still had a place in my son's life. Caleb turned away. "I'll deal with this later." Then he walked back toward the people celebrating his marriage. I followed the hostess toward the side of the room. The chair she gave me was positioned beside the kitchen door. It was cold beneath my dress. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. I told myself not to cry. Not here, not in front of strangers. I had never expected a speech. I hadn't expected to be introduced. I didn't even need a photograph. I only wanted a seat. Something that quietly told everyone in that beautiful room, this woman belongs to him. Instead, people walked past me without knowing who I was. 2 guests handed me empty wine glasses and asked me where they could find the bar. One woman asked whether I knew where the restrooms were. Nobody asked my name. I eventually stood and walked toward the cake table. That was when I heard Brianna's voice. "She just wants attention." Another woman laughed. "She looks like she dressed for a funeral." Then came Caleb's voice. "She didn't pay for anything tonight. Not the flowers, not the venue. Nothing. She's always been like this. Somehow everything has to become about her." I froze. My hand pressed against my purse. The envelope was still inside. The check suddenly felt heavier than a brick. A wedding coordinator approached me. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you're not supposed to be back here." She pointed toward a side exit. I nodded. I didn't argue. I walked outside into the cool evening air. The music continued behind me. Laughter followed. I reached my car and sat behind the steering wheel. For several minutes, I couldn't move. Then I opened my purse. The envelope was untouched. I stared at it. I had spent years believing that love meant giving without keeping score. But sitting there alone in that dark parking lot, I wondered whether I had confused love with allowing myself to be forgotten. My phone was in my hand before I realized I had picked it up. There was one person I could call, Everett, Thomas's older brother. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but years earlier, after Caleb had begun distancing himself from me, Everett had told me something I never forgot. If that boy ever forgets where he came from, call me. Any hour. I pressed his name. He answered almost immediately. Claire? I tried to speak. My voice broke. Everett, I'm at Caleb's wedding. Silence, then his voice became calm. Where are you? In the parking lot. Stay there. Everett, you don't have to. I said stay there. 23 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the lot. Everett stepped out. His hair was completely silver now, and he leaned slightly on his cane, but his shoulders were still straight. He walked toward me. He didn't ask whether I wanted a hug. He simply looked at my face. What happened? I told him. The seating chart, the chair, the whispers, the side door. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked toward the glowing reception hall, then back at me. Claire, he said quietly, you did everything right tonight. I shook my head. No, I think I made a mistake coming. No, he said. They made the mistake. He offered me his arm. Come on, I hesitated. Where? Back inside. My heart began pounding. Everett, I don't want a scene. We won't make one. He looked toward the reception hall. We're simply going to remind everyone who the woman they just humiliated is. I took his arm. Together, we walked toward the doors. And when they opened, the music was still playing. But this time, people noticed us. One by one, conversation stopped. Caleb turned. His face went pale. And suddenly, the entire room understood that the woman they had pushed into a chair by the kitchen had not come back alone. For several seconds, nobody moved. The music faded into an awkward hum, and every face in the reception hall seemed turned toward us. Caleb stood beside Brianna beneath the chandelier. He looked nothing like the little boy I remembered. That realization hurt more than I expected. Everett and I stopped several feet from the dance floor. Caleb swallowed. Uncle Everett. Everett raised one hand. Don't. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. You have something to explain first. Brianna stepped forward. This really isn't appropriate. This is our wedding. Everett looked at her. You're right. She seemed relieved. Then he continued. And that's exactly why what happened tonight should never have happened. Her expression tightened. Everett turned toward Caleb. I want you to look at your mother. Caleb did. I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt. Embarrassment. Maybe even shame. But it disappeared quickly. Mom, I told you we'd talk later. No, Everett said. Caleb looked at him. Uncle, you told her she didn't belong here. A silence fell over the room. Everett continued. She came to celebrate you. She brought a gift. She came quietly. She didn't demand attention. She didn't interrupt your ceremony. He pointed toward the side of the room. And you put your own mother beside a kitchen door. Someone near the bar lowered their glass. Brianna folded her arms. She wasn't on the seating list. Everett turned toward her. Then who decided that? Brianna didn't answer. Caleb stepped in. It was complicated. No, Everett replied. It wasn't. He looked at Caleb with the same disappointed expression I'd seen on his face at Thomas's funeral. You either wanted your mother there or you didn't. Caleb stared at the floor. I finally spoke. It's okay, Everett. He turned toward me. No, Claire, it isn't. I touched his arm. I don't want everyone watching this. He softened immediately. Then you shouldn't have to explain yourself. Caleb looked at me. Mom, I'm sorry. Those 2 words should have meant something once. They would have. But now they sounded like something he had been forced to say because an entire room was listening. I nodded. Thank you. Brianna stepped beside him. We've been under enormous pressure, she said. You don't understand what it is like trying to bring 2 families together. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because she was talking about bringing families together while I was standing beside a kitchen door. Because my name had been removed from the seating chart. Everett answered for me. Then you should have made room for the mother who raised the groom. Brianna's cheeks flushed. Her father, Richard, finally stepped forward. Perhaps everyone should calm down. Everett looked at him. I agree. Then he pointed toward me. Starting with giving this woman the respect she deserved 3 hours ago. Nobody spoke. I felt suddenly exhausted. Not angry, not even embarrassed anymore. Just tired. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. Caleb's eyes followed it. This is for you, I said. He stared at it. What is it? Your wedding gift. He didn't take it. You don't have to. I know. I placed it on the gift table. The envelope landed quietly among the other presents. I brought it because I wanted to help you begin your marriage. Caleb looked down. I appreciate it. I nodded. Good. Then I stepped backward. For the first time that evening, I felt free to leave. But before I could turn, an older woman approached me. Claire? I recognized her after a moment, Mrs. Dalton, Caleb's 4th grade teacher. She had once told me that my son was one of the most thoughtful children in her classroom. She took my hand. I didn't know what was happening. I smiled sadly. Neither did I. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. Thank you. Another guest approached, then another. People who had known me years ago. A neighbor who remembered Caleb riding his bicycle down our driveway. A former coworker of Thomas's who remembered how many nights I had driven my husband to the hospital. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew enough. And suddenly I realized something. I had spent years worrying about what Caleb thought of me. Yet the people who truly knew me had never needed an explanation. I walked toward the exit. Everett followed. Just before we reached the door, I heard Caleb behind me. Mom. I stopped. I turned around. He stood alone now. Brianna was several feet away. His expression had changed. For a moment, I saw the little boy again. The boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The boy who once whispered that I was the strongest person he knew. I'm sorry, he said again. This time, his voice sounded different. I nodded. I hope you have a beautiful life, Caleb. Then I left. Outside, the night air felt cleaner. Everett opened the passenger door of his sedan. Before getting in, I looked back at the glowing building. The place where my son had married the woman he loved. The place where I had been treated like an unwanted guest. I expected to feel shattered. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Everett started the engine. You okay? I looked through the windshield. No, he nodded. That makes sense. I took a deep breath. But I think I'll be okay. He smiled. That sounds more like you. We drove away without another word. Behind us, the wedding continued. But something had changed. Not in the building, in me. For years, I had believed being a good mother meant keeping the door open no matter how many times someone walked away. That night, I finally understood something different. A door could remain unlocked without me standing beside it forever. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop waiting. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. Then I saw the sage green dress hanging over the back of the chair. The memory returned, the wedding, the seating chart, Caleb's words. You don't belong here. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. There are some wounds that arrive loudly. Others settle quietly inside you and become part of the furniture. This one was quiet. I went downstairs and made coffee. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I expected to cry all morning, but instead I found myself thinking about the envelope, the wedding gift. The check was still sitting inside it. I had written it 2 weeks earlier, when I was still proud of what I was giving my son. Now I wasn't sure whether I wanted him to have it. I opened the drawer where I kept my bank records and looked at the amount. It represented months of careful saving. Money I had put aside by skipping little comforts, repairing old appliances instead of replacing them, and keeping my grocery budget painfully tight. I had wanted Caleb and Brianna to use it toward a home, a fresh beginning. But what bothered me wasn't the money. It was the meaning behind it. I had given because I loved him. He had accepted my love while rejecting my presence. I closed the drawer. Then my phone buzzed, a message from Caleb. Mom, I'm sorry about last night. Things got out of control. We should talk when everything settles down. I read it twice. There was no mention of the seating chart. No mention of the folding chair. No mention of telling me I didn't belong. Just things got out of control. as though the evening had somehow happened by itself. I placed the phone face down. An hour later, another message arrived. This one was from Brianna. I'm sorry you felt uncomfortable. The seating arrangements were handled by the planner, and there was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I almost smiled. A missing name could be a mistake. A folding chair could be an oversight. But 3 people whispering about me near the cake table wasn't a misunderstanding. Neither was Caleb telling me I didn't belong. I deleted the message. Then I called Everett. He answered on the second ring. How are you? I don't know. That usually means you're thinking too much. I laughed softly. You always did know me. 30 years will do that. I told him about the messages. He listened, then he said, What do you want? The question caught me off guard. Nobody had asked me that in years. I don't know. Yes, you do. I stared out the kitchen window. I want my son to understand what he did. That may never happen. I know. And I swallowed. I want to stop needing him to understand. Everett was silent for a moment. That, he said, is something you can control. After we hung up, I walked outside. My backyard looked exactly as it had the day before. The tomatoes needed tying. The basil had grown wild. A few weeds had pushed through the flower bed. Ordinary things, beautiful things, things that had nothing to do with my son's wedding. I spent the afternoon in the garden. By evening, my shoulders hurt, but my mind felt lighter. 3 days passed, then Caleb called. I almost didn't answer. Hello, Mom. His voice sounded tired. How are you? I waited. I'm fine. Good. Another pause. Then he said, About the gift. I closed my eyes. I don't want to discuss the money. But you left a check. I know. Can we use it? I opened my eyes. There it was. Not an apology, not an explanation, the money. I thought you might need it. We do. Of course they did. I looked around my quiet kitchen. Caleb, I need you to answer something first. What? Did you mean what you said? Silence. When? At the wedding. He breathed out slowly. I was stressed. That isn't what I asked. Another silence. Finally, he said, I didn't mean it like that. I felt something inside me settle. You said I didn't belong there. I was trying to keep things calm. No, you were trying to keep me away. Mom, it's okay. I didn't want another argument. I just needed to know whether you understood what you did. I said, I'm sorry. No, I said gently. You said things got out of control. He didn't answer, I continued. I spent your entire childhood making sure you never had to carry my problems. I worked when your father couldn't. I raised you after he died. I never reminded you what anything cost. My voice trembled. But I also never expected you to repay me. Mom, I know. I don't think you do. He became quiet. I hope someday you will. Then I told him the check was no longer available. He sounded surprised. You're keeping it? No. I paused. I'm giving it somewhere else. Where? You'll find out eventually. He asked again. I didn't answer. We ended the call. That night, I opened my checkbook. I wrote a new check, not to Caleb, not to myself, to the local community center. They had a small program helping single parents pay for school supplies, transportation, and emergency groceries. The amount was almost exactly what I had planned to give Caleb. When I signed my name, I cried, not because I regretted it, because for the first time I understood the difference between giving from love and giving, because I was afraid someone would stop loving me. I sealed the envelope. The next morning, I drove downtown and handed it to the program director. She looked at the check, then at me. You're sure? I smiled. Very. She hugged me. I hadn't expected that. I drove home with tears in my eyes. They weren't tears of rejection this time. They were tears of relief. That afternoon, I opened the cedar chest in my bedroom. Inside were 11 years of memories. Caleb's elementary school drawings. His first report card, a photograph of Thomas holding him as a baby, a birthday card Caleb had made when he was 7. I touched the edges of those old papers. I wasn't going to throw them away. Forgiveness didn't require forgetting, but I finally understood that remembering my son as a child didn't mean accepting the way he treated me as an adult. I closed the chest. Then I walked into the kitchen. For the first time in years, I pulled out the cream-colored napkins I had been saving. They had been intended for special occasions. I spread them across my table. One day, I thought, people would sit here, people who wanted to be here, people who wouldn't need me to beg for a place. I didn't know their names yet, but I knew there would be room, and somehow that felt like the beginning of a new life. The following Sunday, I woke with an idea. It wasn't a grand idea. There was no dramatic plan, no sudden transformation. I simply wanted people around my table. For years, I had treated my dining room as though it were waiting for an important occasion. The china stayed behind glass. The cream napkins remained folded in a cedar chest. The good dishes were used twice a year. I had spent so much time waiting for family that I had forgotten family could also be chosen. So I decided to stop waiting. My first invitation went to Josie, the young woman who lived 2 houses away. She was 21, attending community college and working evenings at a pharmacy. I'd seen her carrying grocery bags up the sidewalk more than once. "Are you eating tonight?" I asked her when I saw her outside. She laughed. "Probably cereal." "Come over Sunday," she hesitated. Really? That was how it started. Then I invited Marlene, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. After that came Marcus, a mail carrier who had recently moved into the neighborhood. Nobody knew one another. That was the point. On Sunday afternoon, I cooked too much food. Roasted chicken, green beans, cornbread, mashed potatoes, and a peach cobbler that nearly burned because I was busy setting the table. When the doorbell rang, I suddenly became nervous. I opened the door. Josie stood there holding a small grocery store bouquet. I didn't know what to bring. "You brought flowers," I said. "They were $5. They're beautiful." She smiled. Marlene arrived next. Then Marcus. Soon my quiet dining room was filled with unfamiliar voices. At first, everyone was careful. People are always careful around strangers. Then Josie spilled sweet tea across the table. Everyone froze. She looked horrified. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," I laughed. "It's a table, sweetheart, not a museum." Marcus laughed next, then Marlene. Within seconds, all 4 of us were laughing. The tension disappeared. Dinner became easy. We talked about ordinary things. Work, weather, bad television, expensive groceries, the ridiculous price of eggs. Josie told us about her professors. Marcus told a story about a customer who had ordered the same package to the wrong address 3 times. Marlene talked about a patient who had fallen asleep during an appointment. Nobody asked about my son. Nobody knew about the wedding. And I didn't tell them. That was strangely liberating. For years, every conversation about me eventually became a conversation about Caleb, my son, my only child, my greatest responsibility. Now, sitting at that table, I was simply Claire. Not Caleb's mother, not Thomas's widow, not the woman who had been removed from a wedding reception. Just Claire. And I liked her. After dinner, nobody rushed away. We sat on the porch as the evening cooled. Josie leaned back in her chair. "This was really nice. You can come again." She smiled. "I'd like that." When everyone finally left, I stood in the kitchen surrounded by dirty plates. I was exhausted and happier than I had been in months. I washed every dish by hand. Then I looked at the table. The cream napkins were stained with gravy. One had a peach cobbler mark on it. I smiled. For years, I had been afraid to use those napkins because I was saving them for something special. Now I understood. This was special. The next morning, Caleb called. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. "Hello? Mom. Hi." He sounded different, not angry, not defensive, just uncertain. "I heard you had people over." I frowned. "How?" Someone posted a picture. "Of course. It's true. Who were they?" "Friends. Since when do you have these friends?" I smiled faintly. "Since I started talking to people." Silence. Then he said, "I'm glad you're doing okay." "Thank you." Another pause. "Mom." "Yes? I've been thinking about the wedding." My chest tightened. "So have I. I know what I did was wrong." I said nothing. "I shouldn't have told you that you didn't belong." "No," I said quietly. "You shouldn't have." I was embarrassed. "Of me?" "No," he paused. "Of myself." That answer surprised me. He continued. "I thought Brianna's family expected everything to look perfect. They have money, connections, all of that. I felt like I had to prove something. And humiliating your mother helped you prove it." "No." His voice cracked. It made me feel worse. I looked toward the window. For the first time, I heard something underneath his words. Not an excuse. Regret, but regret wasn't the same as change. "Caleb," I said, "I love you. I love you too. but loving you doesn't mean I have to accept being treated badly. I understand. I hope you do. We talked for another 20 minutes. He didn't ask about the money. That mattered. When the call ended, I sat quietly for a while. I wasn't suddenly healed. One conversation couldn't erase years. But something had shifted, not between us. Inside me, I no longer needed an apology to decide that I deserved respect. That afternoon, I received a letter from the community center. They thanked me for the donation. One line caught my attention. Your contribution will help 12 local students begin the semester with supplies they otherwise could not afford. I read that sentence 3 times. 12 students, 12 families, 12 children who might feel a little less forgotten. I folded the letter carefully. Then I placed it beside Thomas's photograph. I think you'd like this, I whispered. That evening, Everett called. You sound different. I am different. Good different. I looked at the dining table. 4 mismatched chairs, 4 empty plates, 1 stained napkin. Yes, then keep going. I smiled. I planned to. Over the next few weeks, Sunday dinners became a tradition. The table grew. Some weeks there were 6 people, sometimes 8. Someone always brought something: bread, dessert, flowers. Once, Marcus brought a terrible casserole that somehow became our favorite joke. The house changed too. It stopped feeling like a museum of the life I had lost. It became a home again. Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable: Caleb. I held it for several seconds before opening it. Inside was a letter, not a text, not a phone message, a real letter, and the first sentence made my hands tremble. Mom, I finally understand what you were trying to give me. I sat down, then I began to read. I read Caleb's letter twice before I could continue. Mom, I finally understand what you were trying to give me. It wasn't the check. It wasn't the wedding gift. It wasn't even the years you spent making sure I had everything I needed. You were trying to give me a mother who would always be there. And I treated that like something I could put away whenever it became inconvenient. I don't know how to fix what I did. I only know I'm sorry. I stopped reading. For several minutes, I simply held the letter, then I continued. Brianna and I have talked about the wedding. She knows what happened was wrong. I know I can't undo that night. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking if someday you'll let me earn your trust again. Not because you're my mother, because you're Claire. And I should have respected you as a person long before I remembered you were my mother. My eyes filled with tears. That last sentence hurt because it was exactly what I had needed to hear. Not I'm sorry you were upset. Not things got complicated. Not you misunderstood. He had finally named the truth. I folded the letter carefully. I didn't call him immediately. Instead, I walked outside. The garden was bright with afternoon sun. I sat beneath the old maple tree where Thomas and I had once planned what to do with the backyard. I remembered him saying, "One day we'll have enough room for everybody." At the time, I thought he meant family. Now I understood that he had meant people, people who needed somewhere to belong. My phone rang. Caleb, I answered. Hi. Did you get my letter? Yes. What do you think? I looked at the garden. I think you finally said what you should have said months ago. He was silent. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, he said. I appreciate that. I miss you. That sentence almost broke me. I closed my eyes. I miss you too. I'd like to see you. I thought about it. Not at your house. Okay, not at mine. Okay, there's a coffee shop downtown. Tomorrow? I smiled. Tomorrow. The next afternoon, I arrived early. Caleb was already there. He stood when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us moved. He looked older, not physically. Something in his eyes had changed. He hugged me carefully, as though afraid I might disappear. I let him. When we sat down, he looked at his hands. I don't know where to start. Start with the truth. He nodded. I was ashamed. Of me? No. He took a breath. Of myself. He told me how insecure he had felt around Brianna's family, how he had convinced himself that my presence would make him look less successful, how he had allowed other people's expectations to become more important than his mother's dignity. I thought if everything looked perfect, I'd finally feel like I belonged. I stared at him. And did you? He shook his head. No. We sat quietly, then I reached across the table. Caleb, I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was. I know. But I can promise that if you keep being honest, we can build something new. He looked at me. Something new? Yes. He smiled through wet eyes. I'd like that. After coffee, we walked outside. The afternoon traffic moved around us. Nothing dramatic happened, no cameras, no speeches, no perfect ending. Just a mother and her grown son walking down